Welcome back to this week's episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. It's to have an old friend of mine, Jeff Crawford from Zo Digital Japan. Jeff, welcome.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you so much for having me.
So, Jeff, you're running your own company here, and that's an extraordinary achievement, to be running your own company as a foreigner in Japan. Mm-hmm. But why are you in Japan? How did you get here? What have you been doing over these years, and how did you come to be running this company, and what does your company do?
Yeah, there's a lot of things to unpack there. So the interesting thing is I didn't know much about Japan 25 years ago, something like that. And I had sushi for the first time when I was living in San Francisco, and just like, wow, hey, this is interesting stuff. And so, okay, so sushi is good. And what about other types of Japanese food? And I don't know, one thing led to another. And before you know it, I was traveling around on a Japan rail pass and liking the country. So I thought, I'm just going to come here for like 2 or 3 years, learn the language a little bit.
So you're in San Francisco.
Yes.
Are you working there? Are you studying there? Or are you living there?
Yeah.
What are you doing there?
Yeah. So I actually worked in Silicon Valley for 16 years for some pretty famous Silicon Valley companies. You've heard of them. For that time, I was actually a developer. So there was like a time where I worked on parts of the Mac OS for Apple, as well as parts of the Windows OS for Microsoft. So yeah, I was basically a techie guy at the time.
I'm interested, in being in Silicon Valley, it took you 16 years to discover sushi, but that's another story. That's another podcast. Yes. So you've got this interest in Japan. Yeah. So you come here, on holiday? Or you took time off work, or?
Yeah, exactly. I would, when I had vacation time, I would just come here with a rail pass and travel around the country and stay in minshukus or youth hostels or whatever, and yeah, liked it. I really liked it.
And when did you get the decision? Okay, I like it so much. Mm-hmm. I'm going to not become a billionaire.
Yes.
Living in Silicon Valley, I'll become a billionaire in Japan. So, at what point did you make that decision?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I'm not so sure if it was like one particular case, right, that made that happen. But I think at the time I was just, Silicon Valley lifestyle can be very tiring. It's after 16 years, it's kind of the same. Everybody's talking tech.
When you say tiring, is it like are they working like, Japanese, sort of 9 to 11, 8 to sort of 12 sort of stuff? Are those sort of hours?
Yeah, that happens a lot. I did that too myself, know, and it's, as a developer, developers tend to come late, work until the wee hours of the morning, that type of lifestyle. Yeah, I lived that lifestyle for a long time.
Yeah. And
but I think more importantly though, when you're in Silicon Valley, everything's about tech, right?
Yes.
Go to lunch, everybody around you is talking about technology. You go to dinner, everybody's talking about tech. One of the reasons why I lived in San Francisco was to get a little bit out of the way of that technology focus. Right. And to me, like Japan is like, okay, they talk about tech, but they've got other things too, right?
They can talk about, yeah.
Yeah.
So really what year did you come here the first to live?
2004.
2004. So you're in Silicon Valley, you're working for the big tech companies, you decide, okay, I want more sushi, I want better sushi, I'm going to Japan. Yeah. And so what do? You just pack your bags and get on a plane and turn up here and start from zero? Or did you have something lined up here when you got here?
Yeah, so I was at Microsoft at the time, and basically internally, I just started applying for different jobs in Microsoft Tokyo. And I eventually found a group that was willing to hire me. So I don't know why, but they did. and it sort of kick-started the whole thing.
So good. You had an internal transfer within Microsoft. That means you've got a job.
Yes.
They're probably going to organize your accommodation for you. They've got, a whole bunch of land in Japan. Easy, right? So how long did you work for Microsoft in Japan?
Yeah, well, just to be clear, like I was not on the deluxe expat package here, right? So they moved my stuff, which at the time wasn't much, and they put me up in some tiny mansion room for 2 months, but that was about it. Everything else I did on my own.
Had to do it yourself,
Yeah. So what was the question?
Yeah, well, I was going to ask, how long were you working for Microsoft here?
So for Microsoft Japan, that was another 5 years.
5 years.
So it was basically 6 years in the U.S. in Silicon Valley and 5 years here in
okay.
Tokyo.
So in that 5 years you're working for Microsoft,
Yeah.
are you a team leader or are you one of the troops, or what's the situation there?
Yeah, so that's a bit of an interesting story. So basically I was just in Microsoft, they would call them program managers, right? So I was just a program manager managing different products and support of different things. And then our manager left, our Japanese manager, and then somehow I got promoted to take his position, and all of a sudden I'm managing a team of Japanese people.
How many people in this team?
It's just like 5.
5, right?
Yeah.
So,
but we also, the other thing too is we manage vendors
as well.
So we had to do both.
Yeah. So you did probably, I guess, in the States, you weren't in any sort of direct people leadership role there because you're doing development work, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So this is your first ever experience to lead people.
Yes.
And you're leading a group of Japanese. What was challenging about that?
Well, I think there's a couple things that are challenging. One of the biggest challenges, I think, is just getting people to change. There's a very strong resistance to change in Japanese culture. And as a manager or as a leader, you got to work hard to overcome that.
So why did they need to change? Because maybe you needed to change rather than they needed to change, right? So, yes. But what was your thinking there? What were you trying to change them to do?
Well, I think there's many cases that I can think of, but especially in the high-tech world, right? The worlds of Apple, Microsoft, Google, the business is always changing almost every year, right? And so, for example, in one case, I had this team of Japanese people focused on Japan, and then suddenly our role became much broader. We don't just support Japan, we also have to support China and Korea as well. And we have this new, 1 or 2 new team members from other places joining virtually. You have to work with them now. So now I have to convince or work with a bunch of Japanese people that are focused only on Japan and ask them to support Korea and China as well. That's a big change. That's a big step up. You can't speak Japanese anymore. You have to speak English. That type of thing. Really hard to make people make that leap and do those new types of tasks.
I guess Microsoft was a pretty Japanese company in Japan.
Yeah, it's interesting. This is kind of a segue, and you feel free to edit this out if you like, but a lot of times the foreign companies are based around who the leader is, right? So at Microsoft, it was run for a very long time by a Japanese leader who was very well respected, right? So in many ways, Microsoft Japan as a company over time became very, very Japanese in many ways. Maybe not as Japanese as some companies, for example, like IBM Japan. At this point, I would regard as totally a Japanese company at this point. So maybe Microsoft Japan is somewhere around, 6 out of 10 on the scale. But yeah, so the situation I was in, I think I was the only foreigner in my group. And there was one department that was half foreigners and half Japanese. I was way off in the corner. But other than that, all across the entire floor, yeah, everybody was Japanese.
So how do you lead this team to become a global entity now, where they're not just focusing on Japan, they're focusing on APAC, parts of APAC anyway. Mm-hmm. What did you do to get them to change their mindset about that, or get them to accommodate that necessary behaviour change of interacting with foreigners, and I guess virtually too as well, which must have made it even more challenging, because the audio is never that great on these platforms. Even today, the audio is not that great on the platforms. It must have been even harder then. Yeah. So what did you do to help them?
Well, this gets into some of the classic techniques of leading through change, but I think one of the first things you have to do is say, okay, if we continue the way things are, we're not going to have jobs in a year or two, right? We have to change. We have to do something different. So you really have to emphasize the need for change. The other thing I would suggest is plan on having a lot of group meetings where people go around and everybody talks about their concerns, right? Let them air their concerns out. Try to have a response to them. Try to acknowledge their concerns, and then, if you can, try to score 1 or 2 victories in the group, right? This guy over here, see if I can flip him first, right? So if I can get this guy over here to say, okay, we got to do this, right? And then let him be your spokesman.
Create influences within the circle who can be champions for the cause, right?
Yeah, that helps a lot.
So, Jeff, did you think to yourself, okay, I'm now the manager. I'm running this team of Japanese people. I've never managed anybody in my entire life. And just by the way, the whole world has changed because now we're running, an organisation that's got to deal with China and Korea as well.
Right.
I've got a group of people here who've become very, I guess, very centred on just Japan, haven't had to use English before. It's going to be a completely new world for them. Did you go, right, I need to study change management, I need to study leadership, I need to study, communication? Or did you do the DIY, do it yourself and learn by trial and error? How did you approach that?
Yeah, I do believe in reading books or understanding the techniques. Dale Carnegie is one. There are others. I was a big fan at the time of something called Manager Tools podcast. That was also very, very good. But yeah, I think it's first understand what are the principles that you can apply. But then you got to turn around and say, okay, is this going to work in Japan? Or is this not going to work? Or is this going to work for my particular situation? Yes or no? So yeah. But I think you got to be grounded somewhere, and why not go with people who have been successful before?
So at least I mean, a lot of leaders don't study anything, or they're trying to apply what's worked for them in another country to here, and then they discover it doesn't work here for different reasons, as we know. So how long were you, would you say 5 years with Microsoft here, was that right?
Yeah, that's right.
So after 5 years here with Microsoft, what happens then?
So I left and I joined Adobe Systems Japan.
Adobe, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and I was there for 5 years.
Now, were you a manager in Adobe? You're running a team there?
I was, yeah.
Right.
I was.
So by this time, you've had this experience of running a team in Microsoft. So when you hit Adobe, you're in a much better position to understand, how things work around here. So again, different company though, different culture, different people.
Yeah.
What were some of the challenges? Because often we tend to think, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yep.
And so you think, well, in Microsoft, we did it this way, of course.
Yeah.
Here I'm over at Adobe. Well, they better do it the old way that I've been doing it because you look like a nail to me.
Yeah.
I'll just give you a good whack here and get you into shape. So, how did you go in bridging from having done it one way with Microsoft into a different company? Were you able to apply just straight across what worked for you before, or did you realize, actually, I've got to tweak this a bit more. I've got some other challenges here I didn't have before. How was that transition?
No, Adobe was probably a unique situation. Probably one of the big challenges that I had at Adobe is they had a rather large engineering team, maybe 50 or 60 people. But by the time I left, I think it was down to 8 people. And then a year later, it was down to 0.
So you were running the engineering team? Is that what you were responsible?
No, not the entire engineering team, but I had I think once again, I had a group of 5 people or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So people are being disappeared.
Yeah. So, and then, of course, managing through change, that was a big one there.
So in that case, when you're in a big organization that's shrinking for whatever reason, I mean, business ebbs and flows. And we've just been, we're still in the pandemic, and I'm sure there's plenty of companies have had to scale down. I'm sure there are plenty of people who've had to change jobs or have lost their jobs. So how did you approach your team? Because they're not stupid, right? They're looking around them. They know what's going on. They've got to be concerned.
Yes.
The best people can always find a job somewhere else. So you tend to be left with the less talented people because they can't find another job. Yeah. So how did you approach that scenario of where we're going here, and they can see the numbers going down, and they're thinking, am I going to be next? How do you keep them motivated?
That's really tough. I don't know if I have any like silver bullet answers for that type of thing. It might get back to the lesson I learned at Microsoft, which is if you continue to act the current way, we're going to fail, right? So we have to do something different. So that's one thing. If you're really skillful, like as a manager or a leader, maybe you can plant these seeds or ideas in their brain and let them come up with the idea, right? So, well, maybe this won't work. Can you come up with some good ideas on how we could do this better? And let them flow with it, right?
So rather than being the font of all knowledge, the guru, the guiding light here, what you're saying is desist from doing that, but use your communication skills to basically get them to take some ownership, feel some accountability, come up with their own ideas, so they're more willing to execute on their own ideas probably.
Absolutely. I think especially managers coming from places like Silicon Valley tend to come into Japan with guns a-blazing. Okay, I see a problem here, I'm going to fix this, and I'm going to fix this problem. And they're fixing what they think are problems without really solving the underlying structural issues, right? The relationships that are so strong in Japan. So I think that's a big mistake that many, many managers make. I've seen it over and over and over again. I'm sure you have as well. So what do? I think a little humility will go a long way, and say, okay, I don't completely understand this situation. I know we have this really bad case, this bad situation right now. We need to do something about it. In Silicon Valley, where I come from, this has worked. We've tried A, B, and C. Do you think this is going to work in Japan, or do you think this will work for this case? Oh, no. Okay, well, what would work better? Try to pull them out, try to get them to state their thoughts and ideas.
It's interesting. Often, it's a broad statement, but often employees in Japan are looking for direction. They're looking for do this, and then they'll execute it perfectly, type of idea, right?
Yeah.
Well, generally speaking, perfectly.
Yes.
But at least they're looking for direction. So when you are starting to ask people for their ideas, asking for their input, you're not giving them the sort of template. They have to actually think. Did you find resistance to that? Were they sort of expecting, well, listen, Jeff, you're the manager. You're getting paid the big bucks. Even if you're not getting paid the big bucks, they think you are. Tell me what to do. Or were you able to actually get them to understand the situation and take some accountability?
It's really hard. I mean, there have been a number of times where I've sat in a meeting with my staff and say, okay, guys, how are we going to solve this problem? Silence.
Crickets.
30 seconds of silence. They're like, okay, how do I get people down? I'm thinking like, how do I get people to talk, right?
Yeah.
Let's pick something.
So why is there 30 seconds or 1 minute or 10 minutes of silence? What's behind that?
Yeah, I think people don't want to be wrong, right? People don't want to be perceived as wrong, or even worse, like going against what you think. So if you're the first person to talk and you don't have absolutely 100% confidence in what you're saying, what you say could be wrong, right? Or it could be, I could strongly disagree with it, right? They don't know. And so, who would want to speak? Who would want to be the first to speak out?
So there's a lot of societal pressure there around rank, status, who joined the company earlier, who's older, that type of thing, who's male, who's female. There's a lot of structure here in the culture around who can speak up. And as you say, well, Japan is a perfectionist society, isn't it? No defect culture, no mistake culture. So the best way to not have defects or make mistakes is do nothing in a lot of cases. So trying to get people to speak up and take some ownership. So what did you find was working for you to actually get around that problem?
Well, sometimes like leave the room. Let them talk amongst themselves to come up with an idea. One thing I've noticed, this is probably not answering your question directly, but if somebody comes to you with an idea, like, hey, Jeff, I have an idea about how we can solve X problem, chances are they've already talked to everybody else on the team already and got their agreement to come to me. And so, okay, that doesn't happen in the US so much, but I've sort of learned to accept it and say, okay, great. And so I reward that case. Like, hey, that's fantastic.
You are understanding this person is more or less a spokesperson for the group as opposed to an individual highly motivated to intervene and look at a problem. So you actually see the ranks of the whole team behind that person in your mind.
Exactly.
When you're talking to them. Okay.
Exactly.
Right,
it's kind of weird, right?
So if you burn that person off, you burn the whole team.
It's gone, right?
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
So that must be a great way of killing ideas.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing too is, as much as possible, when you see it, when somebody comes up with an idea, no matter how bad it is, just reward them somehow or acknowledge them somehow. Mm-hmm. Hey, thanks for coming up with that idea. Okay, that's a really good idea. I don't think it would work, but prove me wrong, right? Mm-hmm. Or explain to me why I don't understand so much. Something like that.
I guess that's right. Brainstorming, innovation, those sorts of things. We tend to, I think, come from poor mechanisms of generating ideas. I remember how many meetings have I been in, and the boss has got the felt pen next to the whiteboard saying, give me your ideas.
That's the problem right there. Why does the boss have the felt pen?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Give me your ideas. And then the boss will lacerate the ideas as they come up and just crush them and then ask for more ideas, After about a couple of rounds of this, a lot of people are sitting there thinking, well, that's a suicide mission. I just think I'll just sit here and say nothing. So that stepping out of the room to let them talk amongst themselves, seeing the individual as a spokesperson for the group, not burning that person because you're burning the whole team, is very good insight. If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. So after, another 5 years at Adobe, was it?
That's right.
Yeah, and then what do you do then?
So that's when I got sort of the entrepreneur, do my own thing bug. So
why did you get that bug?
Well, after working for 25 years into rather famous, rather big companies, honestly, I got tired of the big company politics and some of the other issues you get with working in a large company. And
was there any pressure on you to go back to the States? I mean, were you a local hire in Japan, so you didn't have to worry about, Jeff, your Japan tour is up, back to San Fran for you?
Yeah. I was a local hire the whole way through.
Right way through. Yeah. So you didn't have that pressure. So
paid in Japanese yen.
Yeah. You could stay. You could stay on.
Yeah.
So great. You're an employee. Get a paycheck every month.
Right.
Right. Everything's sort of settled down. What do you do?
Yeah. So I had a couple of business ideas. One of them, that I started was digital advertising for music and dance schools in the U.S. So I started this company around this concept using principles like the lean startup principles, having an MVP, launching it
minimum viable product, yeah.
That's right, yeah. Launching it as quickly as possible, trying to get a few customers to see how they operate. And I did all that in less than a year, and then I discovered it wasn't going to work, so I shut it down.
It's an interesting idea. You picked on the States as a market. You're in Japan.
Yeah.
And you've specified a very niche area.
Yep.
Right? So what was your market research to tell you that digital advertising for dance schools, etc., was a viable business. How did you reach that conclusion? Ultimately, it didn't prove out to be that way, but
exactly.
there must have been something that you said, okay, I think there's a shot here.
Yeah, so I did a number of things. I mean, I analyzed different dance school. All you have to do is look at their websites, and you get an understanding of, wow, if they had a better website, they could get a lot more, customers, meaning students, right, to their classes. So I did that. One concept that I did was I reached out on places like Reddit, and I said, if you're a dance school or music school owner, would you be willing to talk to me, and I'll send you an Amazon gift certificate. So I think I interviewed 10 to 20 different owners, and I pitched this concept of, would you be willing to pay like a monthly fee, to have leads, people contact you, and then, would that be interesting to you? And yeah, the overall feedback I got is, that sounds like a great idea. So so I got 15, 20 owners, right, business owners telling me it's a good idea. I had a pretty good understanding of how I could do an MVP. I went to the U.S. I attended a couple of dance expos type thing. I had like a little booth. I worked hard, and I got four customers, some number like that. But what I learned ultimately was that it's a huge amount of work just to get those 4 customers for like a low budget service. And then I realized that the financials wasn't going to work at all. And so, I just decided at that point to shut it down.
Often those sorts of schools are not a hobby, but it's sort of like a hobby love of something that has got a small paycheck attached to it.
Yes.
And so they're trading off love of the dance, art, against livelihood, as opposed to they're trying to have like 1,000 students, and they're often not business people, they're dance experts, so they're not able to make the transition to scale.
Yep.
Yeah. Exactly. So what was the next thing you tried?
So, I mean, during that time, I also was doing consulting here in Tokyo. So I had a lot of people coming to me saying, hey, Jeff, can you help me with my analytics? Can you help me with my Google ads, Facebook ads, that type of stuff? So on the side, I just started doing, we would call it consulting. So after I shut the company down, I just decided to go full in on consulting. Started off a very simple website, JC Digital Consulting. Spent about 2 minutes thinking about names.
So this is Zoho Digital from the very start.
Yeah.
So why is Zoho Digital? I mean, Zoho, people reading the name from an English point of view would say, this is zoo.
Right.
Zoo Digital. So it's something to do with the zoo as opposed to Zoho, which is elephant in Japanese, right? So were you thinking zoo, or as in where animals are kept, or were you thinking zoo as an elephant?
Oh, zoo as an elephant, definitely.
Right.
I mean, elephants are really interesting creatures, right? They're very intelligent. They're also very strong, but they're also most of the time very, very passive, unless you kick them or make them angry. So it's really interesting. The other thing about elephants that's interesting, I think, is the leader of the herd is well known for helping nurture the young, unlike other types of animals in the wild.
Which don't do that.
So so to me, like Zoho, I think really makes it's sort of like what we do, right?
So Zoho Digital automatically, I guess, is a Japan market focused business just by the name itself.
Yes.
Right? So how do you're now on your own, so you can't do everything by yourself.
Yeah.
So you need to get people to help you. So you've got a choice here. Do I go the route of hiring people on salary to work in the business, or do I get freelancers, subcontract to me to provide services? What were you thinking there?
Yeah, so I first of all, there's this big, when you're a consultant, right, and you've had some success, you have to decide, okay, am I going to just continue doing this consulting thing in one particular niche, or am I going to start hiring staff, right, and then growing that into a business? Ultimately, I decided to go the latter, right? So I started hiring people, I started training them. I eventually went from being a consultancy to being an agency, right? And then I grew the business that way. So ultimately, I mean, everybody has to make a choice on the type of person you are. Fortunately for me, I had management experience at places like Microsoft and Adobe. I think I understood how to manage people, how to have good processes, that type of stuff. And so for me personally, everything came together. I've always had a love of user experience, right, with computers. I'm very strong and very interested in things like analytics, like looking at data to see what people are doing. And yeah, I have some, I don't say skills, but I have some successes and failures in managing people as well. So to me, that all brought together, and I'm saying, okay, I can do this. This is something I can do.
So one of the issues in Japan is actually getting people to join you.
Yes.
We're a franchise business. In 2007, we bought the franchise, so we got start from zero, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it was a nightmare to try and convince people to join this old brand name, but a new company running the brand.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of trouble and made a lot of mistakes, I think.
Sure.
How did you convince people to come on board to a new operation as an employee?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things that I did that I think really had big benefits. One of the things I did is I started a meetup. It's called Tokyo Digital Marketers. At the time I started it, I think it was 2015, I just wanted to relate to other digital marketers in the Tokyo area. So I started this meetup. The first event had something like 10 people, 5 of them were my friends, But eventually this meetup grew, and now pre-COVID, we when we had the meetups, we'd have like 60 people, and we had like a mailing list of like 2,000 people, something like that. But through events like that, you can network, you can talk about who you are. The Tokyo Digital Marketers was wonderful because I could meet people doing all types of things. It's like, oh, you do PPC? Oh, that's interesting. Are you busy? Can I have your business card, please?
So PPC, for people who don't know, means?
Pay-per-click advertising.
Pay-per-click, right?
Yeah.
PPC, pay-per-click, right?
Yeah. So, it was just a great way to get to know people. The other thing, too, is...
so you didn't actually have that grand strategy. You weren't... sitting down there with a piece of paper going, right, grand strategy here, I'll start a meetup. That'll give me access to people I can hire. It'll give me access to clients. It'll give me, contacts. You weren't thinking that way. You were just thinking, I'd be nice to, meet people in my sphere and see where that goes. So you didn't have like a massive plan for that.
Yeah, honestly, in 2015, in many ways, I don't think I had any idea what I was doing.
Right.
All I know is I didn't want to go back to corporate life. I want to do my own thing. I want to make an impact somehow. And starting the meetup was one thing I did. I went to a lot of meetups or organization. ACCJ is one. We met in ACCJ. That's one thing. I also did a lot of stuff online as well, right? So hired people through different freelancing boards or stuff like that. Answered people's questions online. How do you do this in Japan? How do you do this? But eventually, made a name for myself. Public speaking appearances as well. That's had some. Big.
So you're giving public speeches about what?
Yeah. So, for example, what's it called? AdTech Tokyo. It's this huge expo, right? Thousands of people, right? And they get speakers, right? So a couple times I've been a speaker for that. I've spoken at ACCJ before. I've spoken to JMEC, which is the Japan Market Entry
Expansion Competition.
Yeah. Or
I
Japan
came up with that name, by the way.
Did you? Okay.
Yeah, it used to be called Japan Market Entry Competition.
Okay.
And it got to a point where the companies were not doing market entry anymore. They were already here for the most part. So I said, why don't we make it market expansion?
Okay.
Keep the same acronym, but give it a little bit of a different spin because it really wasn't market entry. But that's another podcast. We'll keep going.
Yeah.
So just thinking about that, had you had a background in public speaking before that, or was this something new?
It was mostly something new. I mean, internally at Microsoft and Apple, I've done presentations before. But speaking...
Did you get training on that at Microsoft?
Public speaking. I mean, I've taken a couple of classes, you know, at Microsoft, even at Apple too. They encourage you to take classes. So I did take maybe one or two public speaking courses, you know, learn the basics. As you can see, I still say a lot, and I'd love to get rid of that. So I learned some basic techniques.
All right. So you're getting some profile.
Yeah.
So coming back to the question about attracting people, so you were meeting them through your meetup. Meeting them through the meetup is one thing.
Yes.
And getting them to drop what they're doing and come on board to a startup is another. So how did you convince them? How did you motivate them to join?
So I think when they come to a place like Zoe Digital Japan, they already know it's not going to be a Japanese company, and it's also going to be an international company. Most of our clients are foreign companies trying to come into Japan. So they know that. They know what the deal is. They know that everything they don't like about working in a traditional Japanese company, they're not going to have to deal with here. And so already the people that come to me already understand that situation, and they accept it, and they're ready to go. So I think that's a big plus. The other concept that we do that I don't think many companies do is we tend to hire a lot of freelancers part-time. We give them a small task, maybe you work 10 hours a week or something like that, and if you do really well, we give you more responsibility. We raise your hourly wage, we give you more hours, and we keep growing them and growing them and growing them.
Do they eventually become full-time employees, or they always stay as a part-time?
Yeah. So it's interesting. Right now, everyone's still either like a freelancer or individual contractor, but I have people working for me 40 hours a week.
Right.
Yeah.
And the government changed the regulations on part-time work, didn't they? And so they were trying at one stage there to decrease the gig economy. They were trying to get part-timers into full-time work. I mean, there's a whole bunch of studies around, particularly men who are part-time on low income, can't get married, therefore can't have children, you know, can't really get taxed because they don't earn much. I mean, there's a whole study on what that means. And so the government was trying to force companies to turn part-timers into full-timers. And then, boom, COVID turns up and wipes out the hospitality industry, wipes out the training industry, wipes out the tourism industry. So they sort of put a bit of a stop on that, I guess. But that's where it's going. So do you foresee that because you've got people working those sorts of hours, that at some point the regulations will say, well, Jeff, you need to hire these people as full-time people?
I don't know if I want to comment so much on the current situation in politics. I just try to live with whatever I'm given with.
But what I'm getting at is whether you like the regulation, don't like the regulation, like the government, don't like the government. What I'm getting at is that is the direction the government's going, and they're going to force companies who've had a lot of people working part-time but 40 hours a week type of thing, force them to make them seichain, formal members of the company. So that's sort of coming. It's already here, but it's sort of, I guess COVID sort of put a bit of a halt on it for the moment.
Yeah. So I think I hope they don't. One, I hope they don't do that. In some cases, I've offered some of my staff, would you be interested in being a full-time employee? No, I would not. I kind of like it this way.
Like to have the freedom.
Yeah. So, you know, it would be a real shame if I'm okay with it this way. He or she is okay with it this way. Now we have to change because of some rule. I mean, if that happens, that would be a disappointment.
So, you know, having people on your payroll as direct employees gives you a certain degree of control over what they do and how they do it.
Yes.
I guess having people who are subcontracting their services to you has got less control over it. So it's difficult enough managing people who are formal employees What are some of the difficulties of managing a whole group of subcontractors who are freelancers to you?
Yeah. So very good question, and I feel like I fight with that almost every week. First thing is you have to convince them not only is this job great for them, but it's better than the other 3 or 4 jobs that they might have. Mm-hmm. So you really got to work hard to keep them engaged.
How do you do that?
Well, first of all, you tell them like, hey, if you do a good job here, here's the goodness that'll happen, right? All the good things.
Is that goodness got money attached to it?
No, not necessarily.
What would be, okay, in that case, what would be an incentive or a reward that you would give them that's not monetary?
Yeah, so, well, of course, more responsibility, that type of stuff.
Is this because they're mainly engineering type of people, technical type of people? Mm-hmm. Is that the
Yeah, so these days we do digital marketing. So it's more marketing related stuff, but it is, you have to have a certain amount of technical or analytical aptitude to be successful.
Okay. Well, the reason I ask that is I read, I've never had a technical background like an engineer or anything like that, but I've often read that the thing about holding on to your engineers is to have a steady flow of challenging work for them because they get bored and they leave to go somewhere else. And it's not about the money.
Yep.
It's about the satisfaction of having a challenging piece of work to do and the satisfaction of completing that challenging piece of work. So when you said that, I was wondering, okay, are they sort of that orientation of people who need challenging work and the reward is getting more challenging work? It's like... this is a bit of a joke, but I've seen it. If you've got to set something up in our company, you've got to set up the slide machine or any sort of technology. Mm-hmm. The engineers are straight over there immediately. Want to start playing with the equipment.
Yes.
I always look at that and they go, "Oh, there you go, it's true." Yeah. So, how about in this case? What are some of the non-monetary rewards that you're able to give them?
Yeah. So, I'm big on career paths, right? So, okay. You're good at this. Are you interested in doing this? Yes. Okay.
Right.
Okay. I'm going to give you some opportunities to do that. So, maybe you start off with, I can do basic keyword research. I can use a keyword research tool. Well, what's the next step beyond that?
So are you training them? Are you offering training to go to that next level, or are you funding them to go and get training to go to that level? Or how, okay, I can do a certain level of keyword research.
Yes.
Now I've got to do this. How do I bridge from what I know to what I don't know to become skillful in that area?
Yeah. So a lot of times I say, okay, you're given X many hours per week on your own to learn how to use this tool or this tool that you've never used before, right? Because it's crucial to do your job. Go ahead, spend some time and learn yourself. I also spend
and you pay
a lot
for
of
that.
time.
You pay for that time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So their sense is, I'm not only getting a pay packet here as a freelancer, I'm also being educated, investing in me and my future, my career through my association with Jeff.
Yeah.
Right. It's all digital. Right.
Yeah. One of the things I tell, and I think they also understand about how that makes them more valuable. Like I tell them things like, after you work on this job, you're never going to look at a website the same way ever again. And so suddenly then they start to realize the value of doing this task, right, or doing this type of work.
When you're at Microsoft or Adobe, trying to get innovation is not easy, and these are tech companies. So I'm guessing that tech companies must have pretty good systems to stimulate innovation. I'm guessing that. I don't know. I may be totally wrong about that. But I'm just wondering, did you either find some good systems for generating innovative ideas when you're at the big tech companies, or have you subsequently, through your own study or whatever experience, found ways to stimulate innovation?
That's really interesting. And we could probably make a whole new podcast on that topic alone. But let me just tell you about some of my experiences with Apple, which would be like 25 years ago, in Silicon Valley. Huge, just the culture. There was a huge emphasis of like, well, what are you doing? why can't you do that better? You're not your management, but even your peers are challenging you to really go outside of the box and do something that's really radical, that's going to surprise people. And then that was the culture at Apple. And it was very chaotic, right? Much less structured than what it was when I was working at Microsoft. But yeah, it brewed those types of ideas, some of those crazy ideas. And yeah, of course, like only 1 out of 100 would bubble up to the top and maybe ship as a product. But it was already had that kind of culture that it was okay to try things. So that was really good. Microsoft, not so much. The structure of the company was quite a bit different, where the program managers had all the power, I should say. And so they would decide what the product specs were, what the schedule were, and then they basically hand those specs to the developer. And the developers had to like work hard to meet the schedule. So it was less exciting, but much more, I was in Apple in my 20s, so maybe that was great for that time. And when you're in your 30s, maybe a little bit more structure is a good thing, I think, because, I didn't want to work till 2 a.m. every night. So yeah, in many respects, maybe Microsoft was better for me at that time.
Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. So were you able to pull anything out of those experiences with these big tech companies in your own company?
Yeah.
When you're dealing with, they're not direct salaried employees, they're freelancers, but you're still looking, I presume, for innovation from them.
Yeah.
Or you're not. Are you saying just do this, do this, do this, or are you actually seeking innovation from them?
I am. Well, first of all, I try to have some processes, and to be honest, we're still struggling to get our processes written down, defined, stuff like that. But I still challenge my staff. I'm like, we've never done this before. Go off and figure it out. Here's a couple articles I found in the web on English. I don't know if maybe I found a few in Japanese, which you rarely do. Okay, here's what we know. Can you come up with a good process for making this customer happy? So yeah, I do challenge my staff to do that.
Okay. And in terms of thinking about when you've got people getting a salary from one source, which is their company, and then you've got people getting business from different sources. You are one contractor to them amongst others. How do you build trust in that situation? Because ultimately, people are not machines. They're full of emotions. I've always found Japanese to be very emotional. When I first got here, I didn't think they were emotional. I just didn't understand where they were emotional. Now I understand how emotional they are. And so, that has an impact on how you relate to people. It has an impact on how you build trust. So what have you found as ways that work to build trust? I mean, if you can build trust with people who are subcontracting to you or people who are freelancing with you, I'm sure there's some crossover to people who've got people who are on the full-time staff. So how have you been able to build trust?
So one is, I think they know my background now, and that helps. They know the companies I've worked with. I've been able to come up with, or I can't say we have been able to come up with like unique things. We've had some really good successes, and we've been able to say, okay, this process, this way of doing things worked really well for client A. Now we're going to hire you, and can you help make it happen with client B? And then here's what we did, and it works really well. If you go through with this, that's my phrase, but you'll learn so much. You'll become a much more valuable person. if you can kind of show that career path or like that new knowledge is going to get you to other places, whether it's at Zoe Digital Japan or some other place, it doesn't matter. But yeah, when they kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel, which says, I'm going to be a better, stronger, more powerful person, whatever, they do that. And it does get their respect and attention.
So, if we're thinking about what have been some of the greatest successes you've found leading people, what are things you've found that have really worked well? You look back and you think, because often when we're doing it, we're not conscious that what we're doing is something going to record. But if you step back and you look at what you've done in building your own business as a leader, what have been some things that worked really well when you look back and think, oh, well, actually, yeah, I didn't realize I was doing that, or I didn't plan to do that, but that actually worked out pretty well.
Yeah. So one thing was like the Tokyo digital marketers stuff, right? I just wanted to have a meetup so I could meet some other digital marketers, right? And now it's turned into this, 60 people each month with big mailing list, famous people coming in giving speeches. Yeah, I was like, wow, 5 years ago that was nothing. Now it's something. You feel good about that, right?
Yeah.
There are other things as well. I think one thing I really like now is I've got some people in the organization that are really stepping up to more like leadership roles. And it's kind of nice that I can kind of sit back a little bit. And then.
So these are not salaried employees. These are freelancers who are stepping up to leadership roles with other freelancers.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. Yeah. So how does that work? A lot of people who've got full-time employees can't get people to step up into leadership roles. The classic thing in Japan is you try and promote someone and they say, oh, I'm not ready. 3 years' time I'll be ready. And for Western, trained business people, that's always a bit of a shock because we're all wanting to get promoted. We're all, trying to get ahead. Yeah. And they're sort of putting a time limit on, I'm not ready yet. So, how has that come about?
Well, one is try to have a good relationship with your staff. I'm a big fan of one-on-ones.
What? Sorry?
One-on-ones.
One-on-ones, okay, yeah.
Every week or every other week. I'm like I talked about before, I'm big on having a career path, which includes things like learning, right? Learning steps. So you start to find out who are the people who are really looking to step
Who's
up,
motivated.
who are motivated, right? And fortunately for me, through all the people I've been working with, two of my staff have really stepped up their game, and I've continued to give them more responsibility, not just technical responsibility, but people responsibility. And they both stepped up and answered the call.
And do you pay them more for that, or that's just...
Absolutely.
You do? You pay them more for that, okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What have been other things that have worked well in terms of leading people here?
Let's see. What else can I say? We already touched on a lot of different things, like the group thing.
Okay, well, let's flip it around then. What have been some disasters? What have been some things you say, geez, I wish I'd known that before I got here, or I wish I'd known that before I did that?
I feel like when you're a people manager, you learn by mistake. Yeah, I mean, it's a very common psychological thing. You learn your best lessons from mistakes. And I've probably been a people manager for 10 to 15 years, depending on how you want to measure it. And yeah, I can happily say I've made a lot of mistakes during that time. So what are some of the things I wish I could have done better? Honestly, I wish I could have learned Japanese better, such that I can speak Japanese, but can I win an argument in Japanese where the other person's emotional or angry, happy, frustrated, something like that? Not always. And I really wish I could do that better.
Well, that's an interesting point because, I speak Japanese too. I can read, I can write.
Yeah.
I'm literate. And a lot of foreigners are not literate. They can speak, but they're not literate. They can't read or write. Yeah. When you don't think about that normally, but that's actually the case for a lot of people. Yeah. And so I tend to have a very direct way of speaking simply because I don't have a big vocabulary. As I have available to me in English. I've got a massive vocabulary in English because A, we've got a lot of words,
Yeah.
and B, I've been speaking the language much longer. So I tend to find myself that my Japanese can be very direct, so I have to be really careful
Yes.
with how I approach things because it can be too direct. So what have you found in terms of using Japanese like that?
Yeah. So I think there was a time where I really wanted to do everything in Japanese, and including speaking to my staff. When I first came to Japan, I was still an individual contributor, and I did everything in Japanese, and that was okay. But once I became the manager, like for example, like what do you say to your staff if they did something well? Do you say "Otsukare-sama deshita" or do you say "Gokuro-sama deshita"? Right? Like, oh shoot, if I say "Gokuro-sama deshita," is that really kind of looking down at them? I don't want to be that type of boss.
That's
right?
you're the boss, right?
Yeah, I don't want to be that guy. Or if I say "Otsukare-sama deshita," now all of a sudden I'm like worrying about all these things that you don't have to worry about if you're speaking English. And I think one of the things I somehow figured out fairly early on is the staff wants me to speak English. They don't want me talking to them in Japanese. Say it. They like the direct, the direct communication, and they know how to handle it, and they know what I mean, and it's done, right? And so I switched from speaking Japanese 95% of the time to speaking Japanese only like 30% of the time or something like that. Right,
that's interesting.
Yeah, after I became a manager. And then, like we talked about earlier, when the group suddenly had this international focus, then I was speaking English 90% of the time. So, yeah.
Well, you needed to get them to be better attuned to English with a Korean or English with a Chinese accent.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So what other things have you found that were sort of disasters in terms of, well, not necessarily disasters, but things that didn't go well as a leader, and you learned from that and you said, you know what, I'm not going to do that again?
Yeah, there's one thing I wanted to bring up, and you probably have some similar experiences, but like if you're a leader or manager coming to Japan for the first time, you often gravitate towards the people who speak the best English. And you're like, oh yeah, that guy understands me. You know, he knows what I'm talking about. So I'm going to place a big emphasis on what that guy does or what he is. And maybe I'll promote him or maybe I'll give him more responsibility. But I've learned over time that, in many ways, the language is a little bit separate from their ability to get things done. And many times it's that guy who's afraid to speak English, guy or girl, right? But they're really good at their job, right? And they should be the main focus because they're the expert, right? But I think I see this over time. New managers come in from the US or Europe and they put all their eggs into one basket in one particular person. And the one skill they have is they speak English, and then that's it. So,
and often those people are not necessarily so well regarded within the group because often the reason they speak English is because they stepped out of the Japanese educational system at some point and come back with a lot of funky Western habits which don't quite fit into the system, and then the system sort of beats the hell out of them to panel beat them back into a sort of Japanese reality. But they've always got that little bit of difference about them, and so people who haven't had that chance to go overseas or may not have been exposed too much to things from overseas find them a bit difficult to deal with because they are different. And so often they're not necessarily the most popular person in the team. And also that jealousy about, well, Smarty Pants speaks better English than I can. I don't like them. That can also be a problem.
Yeah, I've even seen like some people sort of waving the English ability as like, hey, look at me, I can speak English. And I've kind of noticed it a couple times where people want to be seen speaking English to me in front of a group of others, like, hey, look, isn't it cool I can speak English? So, I don't really favor that or try to recognize that.
So if you were going to give some advice to someone who is going to be sent to Japan and they don't know Japan, they don't know the culture, and they're going to be leading a team here, what would be some advice you'd give them?
So the first one, of course, is be careful who you favor, right? It's not just about English ability. Another one is swallow the humility pill, right? Have a lot, not a little bit of humility, but a lot of humility.
Now that's going to be difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because often you're not sent to Japan to run a beautifully positioned, well-oiled machine that's ticking over the money like a champion, you know. Often there's been something happen in the market or something happen with the hierarchy here, been a change at the top or they've had to change the top or something's gone on.
Yep.
And your sort of marching orders from headquarters are, okay, Jeff, we're sending you to Japan, now go over there and fix it. You know, so you've got that it's broken.
Yeah.
Or it's not functioning properly, or it's underperforming.
Yeah.
I've got to go in there and fix it. So the humility part is not necessarily such an easy bolt-on, is it?
No, not at all. And I've been in that situation before where, you know, the head office is sending people in and you're regarded one of those hatchet guys, right? Which is just a terrible way to get started. So yeah, that's tough. But no, it's a tough balance. Right. But from my experience, I've seen a lot of managers, leaders coming in who, like I said, come in with both guns blazing, saying, hey, I'm going to fix stuff. It might work for a few months or maybe a year, but as soon as you leave or close the door, boom, everything's back to the way it was before. So yeah, you have to be careful about that, and it's tough. It's a tough balance of, you know, humility versus you know, being aggressiveness, I guess. So you sort of have to work that, but you need a lot more finesse, right? And you need to work the finesse. You need to read the air, so to speak, in terms of understanding what's going on.
Well, the air is different here. I mean, when you say finesse and reading the air, are they even aware of what the air is in Japan? This is we're using a Japanese kuki-o-yomu idiom about read the air, read the room, read the vibe, read the mood, right? What's going on. Sometimes hard enough to do in a Western environment, let alone a Japanese environment, because you don't know Japan. How do you read the room? How do you get the vibe? How do you understand the vibe when you get here? You don't know the language, you don't know the people. So how does that work? Where someone has been your senior, and they may not be your director, supervisor now, but you've got obligations to them from the past and things they've done for you, or you've got responsibility for people, but now they've moved to another section, but still you feel responsible for them. So there's all this subterranean stuff going on. You can't see that from outside.
You can't
just
see it.
jetting in, you know.
And the thing is, what people may not realize is it goes beyond the company structure. It could be supplier-vendor relationships.
Yep.
It could be, hey, you know, these two people work together in this company and then this company and then this company, right?
Yep.
So, you know, it transcends company boundaries. And you may have people on your team that are more loyal to this person outside the company than they are to you as the manager.
Yeah. So how do you deal with that? What do you do about that?
I don't know. I offer no special advice here.
At least be aware there's a possibility of that. I guess, you know, when you come in representing change, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. You had to make changes, you know, when you came into Microsoft. But there's also what's the lay of the land here? What are the ramifications of the change? How do I get an idea of who's going to be impacted by this? Because often we'll tend to see things in a very linear fashion.
Yes.
It's just this. We won't see all the web, you know, the spider's web of other things that are connected to it.
Yes.
And so that's why there's often resistance, because it's, you know, you push the button here, it's going to blow something up over there. We would never connect the dots, but they do. So I guess that's awareness. So apart from trying to get that awareness, what other things would you recommend?
Yeah, and let me just make it clear. You may have some number in your head, but it's going to take you 1 to 2 years just to figure out those relationships.
Yeah.
So do you really want to come in after 3 months and say, okay, team, we're going to do this now, right? When you still don't understand all those relationships. So yeah, this is maybe continuing on from the previous point, but you know, compared to other business cultures or other countries, you may want to take more time to understand the situation before making those executive decisions on what to do.
Yeah. Which is, again, the balance, isn't it? You've got your boss on your hammer
Yes.
from headquarters about, hey, look at the numbers, Jeff. The number, you've been there 3 months.
What
are you doing over there?
What's
Eating
going on?
sushi all the time, having a nice sake?
Yeah.
You should be working. So, again, I suppose managing headquarters, is often a topic that comes up when I do these interviews of,
Yes.
this is often your most difficult relationship is with headquarters.
Yeah.
And trying to adjust headquarters often ignorant expectations about Japan because they don't know anything about Japan, but they have a certain rationale about how they think things should be, and they expect you to be the one who's going to be the change agent to turn into little mini headquarters, which I haven't seen that happen anywhere here yet, so that's probably unlikely.
Yeah, you highlighted, I think, was a really important point is as a leader, as a manager in Japan, you really need to manage expectations above you really, really well. And ultimately, I think that was probably the biggest challenge I had and probably the biggest reason why I left Microsoft is I got so frustrated with the management at the Honsha, right? The home office that I just said, okay, it's done. Right?
Yeah, I think, I'm a bit like you. You get to a certain point where you go, I'm done. I'm done with trying to explain Japan to executives in headquarters. I'm just done with it. I'm going to run my own company. I've had it, so hence we're both working for ourselves.
Yes.
As a direct result of that, probably.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff, thank you very much. It's been great to hear your story and hear, you've got a bit of a unique spin on things here because you're dealing with people who are not your direct employees, but they drive your business, and how to manage that group of subcontractors to you is, again, another layer of leadership which has got its own degree of difficulty. So thank you for helping us out to understand that.
Sure, my pleasure. Thank you very much.
So please join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.